So as we work on that, we're gonna keep it symmetrical for as long as we can. And then at some point, we're gonna make it unique to work in those differences that we have on each side. For now, let's add another edge loop here. And let's put that up to roughly this position there where I have it. And now, once again, let's study the reference image, and we can see that this is where we have that curve to the inside starting. So right now I'm doing that on both sides. And another thing that I want to do here is keeping it simple for as long as we work on it. And I'm just going to collapse that here. So that way it's easier for us to work with this geometry. We can then later always add some more loops to it. I want to make that a bit more even here, the distribution of these points. And now let's take these edges here and extrude them so that we can use them here to fill that basically at the front. So I'm gonna put it here all the way up to that point. Now let's select everything and merge by distance, and we want to make sure we have these two vertices merged there, because we want to keep that curve there in place. We're not going to align it. That's going to be useful in just a moment. So now let's extrude another segment up here. And this one, let's align it on the Z-axis. So now with that, what we can do is go over here to item, and we just copy the Y-axis here on it. And then let's select these edges and paste it back into place. So that way we have that perfectly aligned. And then we can merge again by distance, which again is two vertices here in that case. We could have also used the snapping, but it's always good to have a different way how we can also approach that. Now I'm gonna use the loop cut tool, and let's make it so that this edge here is aligned with that here on the right side. Actually, let's align it SZ0, and then let's go up here so that we have a straight line going through. Now let's use another loop cut here, and let's put that one up here. So that way we have that curve there still in place for that loop. And now I want to use another one around here where basically we have the deepest point. If we look at the reference image. This one I'm going to align again. And now we can make a ring selection here on that. And then in the front view, let's give it a squeeze here. So that we have this depth there. And now we can select these vertex points here all the way to here. Let me get rid of the selection at the back and do again. So these vertex points here. And with this, we already have the basis here for where we have that angle, that curve. Now I'm going to select these vertex points. And that way we already have this a bit in place. Now only the side edge I want to push over here like that. And then we can individually select that vertex point on top. And also push it over a bit. Now with that edge only, let's go to the bottom view. And let's put it like this here so that we start working on that curve. This one here as well. So then we have now a little bit of this zigzag here sticking out. So let's also take care of that vertex point individually. And this one here also a slight bit. So with that in place, we can then take a look here at what we have at the top. And these vertex points, I also have them selected at the back. I want to bring them down a bit here. so that we have a bit more space there in between these loops. And then let's take that here again, and I'm gonna just fine-tune it a bit. And these vertex points, let's give them another squeeze with a scale tool according to our reference image. So this is a good basis here. And then we can bevel that here as well. So I'm gonna have two segments here at the bottom, and here at the top we're gonna do the same thing. Also two segments, and that way we already get this shape here in place. Next, I want to make that a bit more high poly, so let's select these loops and let's give it a segment each here, only one. Let's also select these individual vertex points here together with the one at the bottom and carefully push it up a little bit here. So now we really have a nice curvature there. Let's take another look at it here from the front, and we have quite a bit of edges here. Maybe we do some optimization later. But for now, let's go over here to the X-ray mode, and we want to delete the left side of it to keep it more simple as we work on it. And then let's select our reference image again, and let's put back on the original one that shows it here from the left side. So now we have some elements that we want to be using a plugin for, which is called the Simple Lattice. It's this one here, and it doesn't come with Blender. You can get it here, and I have it in the README, the direct link to it. So download that zip, and then you just go on install, and then it will pop up here. And after we activated it, we can then use it. So we will use it in just a moment. Let's go back here to this edge, and let's extrude out, snap back, and drag over here to the right side. And the same here for that one then. Now we can select this edge and dissolve it. And what we want is to work on that hole there where the trigger is in, the trigger guard. So we're gonna have a cylinder. Let's rotate it around here on the y-axis. And then let's work here on the radius. I'm gonna put it to 5. That's obviously not enough, so let's put it around 20. And then we can use this cylinder here, once we positioned it, to do some deformation on it. So also the z-axis is way too much. I'm gonna put it to 20, just so that it sticks out on that plane here. Now we can use object and lattice, and that way we are able now to use these control points to deform that cylinder. You want to be in the box selection mode for it if you aren't. And then we can select these vertex points and simply move them into place to make that cylinder fit here on this region where we have the cutout hole. So this is something that I wish Blender already had on its own, and it sort of does, but it doesn't have it like this plugin does it here, where we can apply it directly on an object and it just basically covers the whole selection of it. It's a little bit buggy sometimes, I noticed, but it does the job here for something like that, and I just wanted to show it because it's a great use case for it. And a lot of people were asking me how we can do the FFD in Blender. So let's just make sure we match that as closely as we can. So that already gives us a good shape here to work with. So the way that this works is that we now have a simple lattice down here that is the one that has the control points. And here our cylinder, we can toggle it on and off and we still see the control points. So it might be a little confusing, but basically we want to go over to our cylinder and then under the modifier tab, this is where we actually have that lattice. And if we apply it, we now have the deformed cylinder and we can delete the simple lattice that was still floating at the bottom of our layer hierarchy. So now we have that applied and you can see that it did a good job, but some of these vertex points we want to individually give a little push here so that this is nice and round and matches our reference image as much as it can. So then we can go over here to our JMesh plugin. Let's use the difference, and because it's not waterproof, we have to put it to fast in the modifier settings. Then we can apply it. And now we can delete that Boolean operator, but it created some extra face here that we want to grow from that side and then delete it. So now we actually have that cutout shape that we want. So now you see these two dots there. We want to select these faces and we have to select it by selecting these dots. It's sometimes a little bit confusing that otherwise we can't select it, but these dots indicate us how we can make that selection, and now we can do an inset on it. So let's do it here to cover basically the next layer where we want to have the depth. So I'm gonna give it a bit of an extra scale here while we still have that active. And now we can individually once again use our vertex points here to match that with our reference image. So you can see that we have the curve there at the background, and that is the outer side of it. And then whatever we have in the inside, we can also then push it to the inside. And that way we have this nice trigger guard there. So that just requires a bit of manual work. We just have to make sure that our silhouette fits and that we don't have anything that seems like there's too much of an offset with these vertex points. So for that, we want to just make it nice and curvy here. And here on our left side, I want to bring that vertex point up, and then let's add another edge loop here, just with a subdivision, so that we have a bit more to work with there. So now this is starting to look pretty good. Now we can work on the next layer. I'm gonna select everything outside by selecting these 2 points there again. And then let's make another inset. And now let's zoom in here. It looks like it's on the right spots mostly, but we have to do a little bit of adjustment. Here we can bring it a bit more to the center. This is basically the outside part. And then we're gonna have another one where it goes in again. So we haven't actually added any depth yet, but right now we're only working on getting these individual layers right. These depth layers. So once again, we gotta make sure that this silhouette looks good. So let's connect the vertex point over here to the corner. We can then later delete everything that's under it that we don't want to have, but for now we still have a use case for it. Let's go over here, and with the knife tool we're gonna follow that edge flow And then let's dissolve these edges here on the left side for now, because we don't really need those. We still, before we delete that space that we have here at the bottom, we're gonna make use of it. Let's select these faces once more. And here I have to zoom in on that point, because we want to make one more inset on it. Here for that bottom part. So I'm gonna have it around here. And that way we have all these segments in place here pretty much. Let's just also work here on that silhouette to complete that. And then we can delete everything that we don't want to have. And add some depth here to these parts. This here, let's also bring that down. And now let's take a look here where we have that grip then later on. But that seems to be fine. Overall, the silhouette seems to work good now. So we can just connect that over here with another knife cut. Let's dissolve these edges here as well. And now we can make a selection here for these vertices and delete it. And the same here. So now this all becomes a bit more recognizable. And then let's go to our edge loop that we have here at the top. And let's dissolve these edges, because those we don't need to have there. So that leaves us then here with this one in the center to start with. And let's put that to 0 on the x-axis. So now it's time to add our depth to it. And I'm gonna make a selection here from that edge all the way around that, like this here. And then let's also put that to 0. So that basically gives us our trigger guard already. And then later we're gonna apply some modifiers to it to make it more higher poly. But now we can take a look at it here once more and do some fine tuning to make that as smooth as we can. And I think here these two vertices, they could also be moved a slight bit. Now let's take a look here at the reference image, and we can see that the trigger guard makes a bit of a curve there at the top part. So we want to go over here to our side view, select these faces that we have already in place, and then from the front perspective we drag it over here to the left side. Now what we can do is select these edges here, and then we give them a bevel to further have some curvature on it. So with 2 segments seems to be enough. And now we can arrange that a bit better here, these extra vertices that we created due to it. Space it out a bit more. So then let's take a look at it also here at the top. And these parts here I'm gonna collapse. Maybe it's a bit much there. And here we have something where I think we could just bevel it with 1 segment to make that a bit curvier there. And then let's arrange that to once again make it more even with our spacing. We don't want to have it too accumulated in only one area. It's always good to have it nice and even. So now we have to make a connection here. I'm gonna have a subdivision consisting out of 4 segments, and that allows us to snap that onto the other vertices that we have there on the left. Let's enable vertex snapping, and then we can simply select this together here with the edges. and move it into place so that we have a nice transition there. So we're gonna be using the remeasure later on to make this nice and high poly. But other than that, we don't need to have more edges here at the trigger guard. So we have to collapse these here, and then let's snap it to the side to make that transition there. Let's select everything and then let's merge by distance to weld that. Let's zoom out here and let's go over to the left orthographic view. What we can do is dissolve these edges here, these two that we have there on the flat surface that don't contribute anything to the mesh anymore. Let's also dissolve that one, and let's get rid of that face. Same as this vertice there. So now I want to make a subdivision through that here. Let's bring that up and let's align it on the z-axis. So that way we have a perfectly straight line going through there, and this is where we have another case of a curvature later on. For now, let's make that connection here by adding a subloop over there. And now let's use our knife tool to get a vertex point where we then can connect it like this here. So let's just make sure that this is perfectly aligned. S, Y, and 0. So now it's time to work a bit more here on the right side of this element. Let's also align these vertex points. Also on the y-axis. And let's get that into place here. Let's push that vertex up so that we can easily drag some more edges out there. But before we do that, I want to also do some connections down here to wrap that up here. Same here for that part. Let's connect that, and then over here, let's connect it like this. Dissolve these edges there, and that way we keep it nice and clean as we work on it. Let's make a cut over here, and then let's align these edges. We're gonna need those in a moment, because you can see there is this element where we have a little bit of a bevel, at least on the left side of the revolver. So for that, we already put these edges there in place, and we can work with it later. So sometimes we just lay the groundwork already for future work. Now, before we work on that side, let's take a look here at that grip part. And you can see how this is rather thin here compared to the rest of it. You don't really see much of it, and we also won't create the whole thing, but we want to have it exposed there a little bit at the back, and then we build the grip around it. For that, let's pull out this face here, and let's bring that into position like this here. And then let's put that vertex point here exactly to that point on the reference image where we have this bow here starting. So now what that allows us to do is add another cut here right into the center pretty much. So we want to make a bevel on it, and we can do that by pressing Ctrl B and then you press V, V like Victor. But since that creates such a big mess here, what we want to do is delete that edge and only work here on these two edges basically. So let's do that again. Ctrl B followed by V to make it a vertex bevel. And now it's about finding that sweet spot, and I just want to push that vertex here a bit further to the left and try again. And now we can slowly increase our bevel amount here. So let's make sure this is really nice and curvy, because this is going to be very visible, especially in the first person game. So I'm gonna have it like that here. And now let's make another knife cut here. Dissolve that edge. And now let's pull that a little bit further here to the right side, so that this is essentially hidden under the grip later on. Now we can drag more edges out here with an extrude. And let's use what we have here and already form a little bit that curve that we have there. So this vertex, let's also take that up here. And then let's delete these edges here. We can fill that back up later. For now, we only want to have the silhouette here. And for that, we're gonna do a bit of fine tuning here. This one we can also give a vertex bevel to make sure that these corners are really nice and smooth here. And then whenever we have that in place, we can make a selection with Alt all around here, and then with F we fill that back up. Now let's use our knife tool again. Let's add some more points here that we can then work with. And this here I'm gonna use our extrusion. And we can do that further down here as well. Let's bring it all the way down here, and let's just keep it simple as usual, and then we can refine it. So since we won't be seeing much of that, we also don't need to have much of a width there. So let's pull that here to the right side. Later we're gonna add the grip above that, so we wanna pretty much have as little exposure there as possible in order to save texture space later on. We only keep it exposed a little bit. Let me just delete that edge there so that we can again use our vertex bevel here on that. And now let's add some subdivisions to get more curvature there. So this one here too, let's add subdivision, and then let's drag it over to the right. So that way we already have it pretty even looking. And now if we select these edges, we can give it a bevel, and that way we have this here nice and smooth already. So now let's fill that back up here. Pressing Alt will make that a little faster to select the whole edge loop on the right. Then let's fill it. And now we can connect these vertex points here as well and do some individual adjustments on it. It's all about the silhouette. And as long as we don't have anything sticking out there, then we achieved our goal. So these here we can collapse so that these faces are evenly spaced. Doesn't have to be everywhere, but in general. Now I'm gonna select everything that we have here on that side, and we have to take into account that we have this bevel there. So let's extrude that out like this, and then let's just slightly push it a bit here to the bottom already. But overall you can see that we have some empty space there as compared to our reference image. You could say the edges are sort of like floating above it. And this is something that we want to keep that way. I'm just gonna take these edges and bring it a bit closer, but we want to remain that space there. And that's because we're gonna bevel that, and the bevel will then automatically sort of like chip away from what we currently see as empty space. So we have to take that into account for that. and that's why we keep it that way, at least for now. Now we take this edge and put it to 0 here on our transform. And now, before we do that bevel, let's put it here with the mirror modifier to X. So let's go over here to our vertex mode. And I want to zoom in on that one particular vertex. And let's see which axis that is. We want to copy the y-axis and paste it onto this one here. Let's just give it a bit of a push to the right side, but that way it's perfectly aligned. And now we can select this whole loop here. So now with that selection, let's find a good view on it here. And then let's give it a bevel. And let's be generous with it. We're gonna be seeing quite a bit of this part, especially in a first-person game. So I wanna have 7 segments on that, as we can see here in the bevel properties. And now I want to go back to the JMesh plugin and let's do the quick mirror here on the x-axis. So that way both sides are the same. And now I want to delete the right side of it. Just make double sure that you're deleting really only the half of it and not some parts here on the left side. But that makes it easier for us to now concentrate only on this side here. I want to select these edges, extrude it out, snap back, and then let's do the usual alignment here. And with our vertex snapping enabled now, we can snap it perfectly into that place here. Let's extrude out some more. And then let's go over here to our vertex mode and snap these things here into place. So that way everything is connected, and then once we have that done, let's select everything and merge by distance so that we have that all welded together so far. You can always make a smaller merge distance, but as long as we don't see anything off here, I'm just gonna use the default of 0.1. So now let's take a look here at our reference image, and you can see how this makes such a step there. So we also want to add that. For that I switch over to the face mode, and then where we have that on our reference image, we can now make a full selection and delete these faces, and that already gives us pretty much that shape. We're gonna then extrude these edges out here. And let's fill that. Let's also select these 2 edges there at the front and connect it. And then we can go over here and also extrude it out, snap back, and then let's put that to 0 here on the x-axis. Now let's have that loop here selected as well with Control, and also extrude it out and put it back to 0 here. So even though this is not really looking exactly like our reference image, it's still good to have that as solid geometry, even if it's under our grip, which we're gonna create later. We don't know how much we will be seeing of it, and it's just something where I think we should have some geometry. Also, in order for our remeasure to work in the best way, we need that to be solid geometry here. So that's why that looks a little bit strange, but let's just keep it like this. And then later we're gonna create our grip over it. So let's also give that a bit more curvature here. And I also want to snap these here. Let's collapse it, and then let's snap it to the right side here in vertex mode to optimize that a bit more. So also let's connect this one, and then let's start adding some depth here so that we can work on things like that here where we have the inner barrel coming through. Let's select everything here all around. We can easily do that while pressing Alt. Let's extrude it out. And now we want to align that here. S, X, and 0. And then let's put it to 0 on the X-axis. So that way we already have a basic shape here in place for our depth. And now in order to make that easier to work with, let's dissolve these edges here. That's where the inner barrel will come through. And while we're at it, let's also dissolve these edges here. And later we're gonna connect this all in a better way. So for now, let's take these lines here, these edges, extrude them out, align, and also center around 0. And then let's do the same thing as on the other side, where we dissolve the edges just to make it easier for our Boolean operation that we're about to do, or at least in a bit. Let's fill that up here on the top as well. And now let's take the whole object and let's go over to our JMesh tools and let's give it the X-axis quick mirror. So that way everything is the same on both sides and properly welded. And now I'm going to show you how to locate if there are still any open gaps. You go to select all by trait and non-manifold. And here we see whatever is still opened. So these are not properly welded, so we can then weld by distance. And now if we do that again, so that is how we can make sure that everything is watertight as it is now. Nothing is showing. So now let's take our piece here as well as the inner barrel into isolation mode. And let's go over to that inner barrel part. Switch over to vertex mode and let's just push that out a bit here to the right side so that this is sticking out a bit for the Boolean operation that we're about to do. And this time we're gonna just use that part here as the operator. So while we are in our JMesh tools, let's apply difference to it. And now we can reuse that piece without deleting it. Let's just put it back to solid. And that means if we apply that now, we have that cutout shape. And just to make it clear, if we take that into isolation, then we still have this part here left, basically the leftover from that operation, because that's how our Boolean operator looked like. So we can simply grow the selection and delete that. So now if we compare what we have with the reference image, we have more of an edge flow there on the reference as we currently have. So let's select these two edges. I want to disable the snapping. And then let's drag it here to the left side so that we have this nice curvature there. And also I want to select these edges here each with Shift, Control and Alt, and then right click and give it a subdivision. And then what we can do is go to vertex mode and select each one of these points that we were just adding here as a subdivision, all the way from top to bottom. And then simply give them a slight push here to the outside. So that way we have a nice curvature here. Let's do something that we haven't done before. Let's use the hide feature. We select these two faces and press H to hide it, and then we invert the selection at the bottom. And now if we go into orthographic view, we can simply select these vertex points, and whatever we do here on one side, we do on the other side as well. So let's just make some of these connections here. So just a nice feature to hide individual parts that we might be working on that we want to completely isolate. And to be fair, something that I should probably be using more often, but the isolation mode also works pretty good for a lot of cases where we see the whole object. And speaking of isolation mode, let's get out of it and let's add this element here that comes behind the cylinder, sort of like as a protection. So let's add the other reference image here. And that makes it a bit easier to read that shape. Now let us add a cylinder here and let's increase the edge count to 48. As the next thing, let's adjust our radius, and actually I want that to be 19.5. That matches our reference image the closest, and then let's rotate it around 90 degrees. And let's just put the depth to something like 50 millimeter. We're gonna adjust that more in a moment. And now we have to work on this shape here. So let's zoom out a bit. Let's be in the X-ray mode. And then we wanna switch over to vertex and select the front parts here. Let's pull that over here to the left side, and now what we can do with the other side is pull it where we see on the reference image that we have this layer here where then the curvature starts after it. Now what I want to do is go to the loop cut, and we're gonna enable our edge snapping. So with that enabled, we can then snap this cut here right onto that edge that we have in the background on the other element. And that ensures that we have it perfectly aligned. So what we can do now is select that face. Let's get out of the snap mode and let's extrude it out here. And then let's go to the scale mode and scale that down. And you can see this little bit of a shadowy line here, which indicates exactly where we have our intersection. So we put it where we see it on our reference image, and that way we have that perfectly aligned. Now we can make a loop selection, add another edge loop to it. And with that one, we just want to add a bit more of a bevel by scaling it here to the side. Let's make sure that these points are somewhat matching here with this other element. So that makes it easier then to connect it later on. Now we can go over to our JMesh tool and let's select our main piece and let's put that to union. Let's just take a look. And let's go over here to delete after apply, and then let's apply. So now we have that welded. Let's take a look at the isolation mode of it. It's looking good. And here, this is what I was talking about. It's still not perfectly welded, but it's as close as it can be. We can now just simply collapse it there. And it requires us to zoom in really close to actually see that there's a gap. But then we select that and simply collapse. So now in order to keep that symmetrical, let's leave it for the moment as it is. And let's concentrate here on that element where we want to have some curve going on. So I'm going to add an edge loop, put that to the right side, and let's add another one here on the left. And this one, we can select it and bevel it to have a bit more wiggle room here. So now with these edges in place, let's drag that down a bit, as well as these ones here. And now this one in the middle, we can also push down a bit for the silhouette. So now we have this one part here that looks like it's being chipped off. We're gonna use our cut tool. And then let's simply connect these vertex points. And that way we have this triangular shape here almost. We just have to also connect it here. And now we can select these vertices and simply delete them and fill it back up, whatever we have as a border here. Let's connect that. And that way you can see we now have this detail here in place for that upper part. Currently we're working only on the left side. That is okay, because right now we keep things symmetrical, so we're just gonna connect that here and then we can copy it over once we have our connections here in place for that. So let's use our quick mirror on the x-axis. That way now we have again the exact same shape on both sides. And we're just going to focus on all the parts that are going to be symmetrical before we get to the unique parts. So now let's work on that part here where we have that hammer inside. And we need to cut out something there. So let's just take a look at how that actually looks like. Of course, we're not going to replicate it one-to-one, but it's always good to have these images to see what it actually looks like so that we can be as close as possible. So since we already have quite a few edge loops there, let's go to vertex mode and let's select this one here. That selects 3 vertices at the same time. And now we select the center one and also push it up a little bit. So that way we already made use of what we have in place there and gave that a bit of a curve as seen on the reference image. We can increase that later with more beveling. So let's make a subdivision based on 2 segments and then we can delete the first one here. And everything that starts from here is where we want to extrude into all the way here to that part. With Control, we can make a quick selection here of all these faces. And with Shift, we can add to it. So now with that selection in place, let's extrude. And then let's snap it back and we bring it down here on the Z-axis and align it. Let's pull it down a little bit further. And then we can select the faces that we have on that side and do the same thing with an extrusion here to the left side. Just make sure that it doesn't by accident stick out there where we have the cylinder. And now we can delete the right side of it and clean that up a little bit here. Let's select these edges and I'm just going to add to that selection. Make sure that you don't by accident select any edges that we don't want to dissolve. So double check for that and then we dissolve it in order to clean that up here. So before we connect these vertice points, let's get rid of this edge loop as well. And now let's focus on this upper part here. I want to also dissolve this edge and the same here for these. So basically we clear that up here and that way it's easier for us to bevel this particular edge here. I'm gonna give it 4 segments and you can see that here at the bottom these vertex points, they look like they're 1, but according to our statistics here these are actually 2. So we gotta make sure to merge that by distance and that way this is welded together here. So now we can go back and connect these vertice points and that way we have this nice bevel here, this nice curve, and we can then focus here on connecting these vertice points at the inner part. Let's give the whole thing an inset and collapse it down. And then we can just snap this like that here. Let's go over to our target weld. And let's just snap it here into that corner. So instead of having to select every one of these vertexes individually, we just basically do a shortcut that way. So let's also take a look at the reference image here for the part where we have the trigger, and similar to what we were just doing, let's first of all use the quick mirror to get everything back into one element on both sides. And I want to select that loop and extrude it out a little bit further here so that we can then make a bevel on it. And I want to give this 2 segments to have this nice and round there. And then let's go over to our face mode and we want to select it where that trigger has its dedicated space here on that part. So let's select all of these tiles here. I'm just gonna double check, and then we can extrude upwards here. Let's snap it back, push it up on the Z-axis, and also align it on the Z-axis. So we can optimize that a little bit later. But now let's get working on this part here. So as you can see, we have a few details on there, and of course we gotta add those. So let's go back into isolation mode, and this cylinder here, we want to select the front faces, grow the selection, and then delete the faces of it. And then we can go over to our selection mode, select everything that is currently open and fill it. Now let's select these vertex points and make a connection. And we want to do the same here at the bottom, and then we can also do it all the way through here vertically. So what we can do then with these edges is make a selection and dissolve them, because those are not really needed any longer. Same here at the bottom. So that way we have that already a bit more optimized. And then let's also make these vertical connections here. So these should go all the way through. And that makes it a bit easier for us to later work on it, because we have to cut in a small detail, which we're gonna do a bit later. I'm just gonna copy it over here on the quick mirror so that we have the same topology. And now let's go back here and assign the original reference image, because now it's time to think of the unique elements of this part of the revolver. And as we can see, we have a bit of a dent there. So we have to take that into account, and the best way to start working on that is to select these edges, and we want to then subdivide it so that we have a bit more to work with here. Let's collapse it like that, and then let's pull it over here to the left side. So now what we can do with that is connect these vertex points. We're only going to do that on the right side, by the way. This is where we have this curve. And then let's connect it like that here. And now we have to add this dent there. I call it a dent because it looks almost like it fell down and dented the metal, but it's on purpose. So let us work on that here. And for that, we're going to use the proportional editing, which is now enabled. So now, just to demonstrate it to you, if we move it like that, it won't do anything because our proportional size is at 1. But if at the same time where we're moving, we press page down or the mouse wheel, we get a smaller threshold on it. So now we can undo that. And that makes sure that our object didn't change in its position. And then we can start working here with this proportional editing threshold. It's quite a bit confusing, I must admit, but that's just how it works. So now we can use our mouse wheel to make that a little bit bigger. And basically we're looking at the background image that we have there. And we want to get that curve right. So now we have this curve here in place, and we can then select like individual edges here, like the one at the top and the bottom. And let's bring that threshold down here to a smaller amount so that we only move these particular edges. And we just want to give it a bit of an extra dent here. So like I said, it's a little bit confusing with this proportional editing. The reason why I don't use the FFD modifier, in case you wonder, is because it simply didn't work well. I tried it, but with this plugin, it just didn't cut out for this kind of a job. So we have to make use of the proportional editing for it. So I hope that you also got that shape into place. Basically, we just wanted to get a bit of a curve. So now we also have some details to work on here at the inside of it. So let's zoom out and then let's take this part here into isolation mode, the whole object. And into that we want to add a cylinder. So that cylinder, let's give it a radius of 8. And then let's bring our depth down to maybe 20. We can still change that later. And let's rotate it around here 90 degrees on the x-axis. So now I want to go here into the front perspective. And let's have these vertices here selected and let's join them. And then with that loop, same as we did earlier, we're gonna do a bevel on that. And now we can select the right side only and we push these vertices over here, and I still have the proportional editing on. This is why it was messed up. So let's get out of that and do that again. And now let's go over here to these edges and the same on that side, and let's dissolve them. So now what we can do is select only the right side, and then we go over here to our scale mode. And you can see how if we scale it in the other direction, we get a bit of this moon shape here. So let's bring it closer to each other. Then we switch over to the face mode and we select the bottom face, push it to the front, and then hit X and delete that face. So essentially we're now looking at it here from the inside, and next we can connect these vertices here, and then we switch over to our edge mode, make a selection here for these edges, and then we convert that over here to the faces and also delete it. So that way we have a nice floating detail here. So let's bring that a little bit further in here. And then we can select these vertices, also bring it a little bit closer, select everything, and let's align it here as close as we can. We want to make sure that it's laying on top of it and it's not intersecting. Let's rotate it around a bit here. And now we want to switch over here to our edge mode, select this whole inner edge loop, and let's give it a bevel. And we can bevel it, maybe give it 3 segments. And now we have this detail here pretty much worked on. Let's go over to our modifier stack and let's add a subdivision surface. So with that, we make it really nice and round for our normal map later on. Let's select it and drag it a little bit here to the front. We're gonna work on the perfect position later, but just so that we see it better here. And you can see we have some overlapping there. So in order to fix that, we have to connect these vertice points here. So this is why it's important to always tell our 3D model where our vertice points are supposed to be connected. And this is why we have to add these edges here to it. In this case, it's just necessary because otherwise we have this very strong n-gon there, and that's what we basically eliminate by connecting these vertex points.